Gilligan's Island was zany, lighthearted, and pure escapism. But off-screen, the cast faced real-life storms, heartbreak, hidden rivalries, and fame that turned to regret. Now, decades later, we go beyond the coconut radios and sandy laughs to uncover the truth behind the island that time and Hollywood almost forgot. Let's begin. Bob Denver as Gilligan. Bob Denver, born January 9, 1935, stepped into TV immortality in 1964 at the age of 29, playing the clumsy, big-hearted first mate simply known as Gilligan. With his floppy hat, wide eyes, and slapstick charm, he became the face of Gilligan's Island, a symbol of innocent chaos and comedic timing that defined a generation. Bob's fame skyrocketed during the show's original run, but the role of Gilligan became both a blessing and a curse. He had already enjoyed moderate success as Maynard G. Krebs in The Many Loves of Dobie Gillis, but it was Gilligan that made him a household name and trapped him in the image of a bumbling fool for the rest of his life. No matter how hard he tried, the world never stopped seeing the hat. Off-screen. Bob Denver was intensely private, often shy and introspective. He married 4 times, finally finding stability with his last wife, Dreama, whom he remained with for over 25 years. Together, they had a son with severe disabilities, Colin, who became Bob's true life focus. Denver quietly stepped away from Hollywood to care for his family, refusing offers and reunions if they would interfere with his responsibilities as a father. Fame faded hard. By the 1980s, Bob was working in local radio, running a small station in West Virginia with Dreama. Far from the glamour of Hollywood, he chose to live humbly, surrounded by nature and a tight-knit community. But the financial struggles were real. Despite Gilligan's Island running endlessly in reruns, Bob never saw the royalties he deserved due to unfavorable contracts signed decades earlier. He also had occasional legal troubles, most notably a marijuana possession charge in the 1990s, which embarrassed him deeply. Still, he faced the headlines with humility, never lashing out at the media or his fans. In public, Bob remained cheerful, gracious to fans, and always willing to sign autographs, even when struggling with declining health. In private, he confided to close friends that he sometimes wished he had never put on the hat. Gilligan was sweet, he once said, but he followed me everywhere. In 2005, Bob underwent cancer surgery and complications followed. On September 2, 2005, Bob Denver passed away at the age of 70. The world mourned not just the character, but the gentle soul behind the laughter. He died quietly in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, surrounded by his wife and son. Alan Hale, Jr. as the skipper. Alan Hale, Jr., born March 8, 1921, stepped into the role of the boisterous and lovable skipper Jonas Grumby in Gilligan's Island in 1964 when he was 43 years old. With his sailor's cap, booming voice, and trademark Little Buddy catchphrase, Hale became the anchor of the show's comedy, a father figure, a leader, and the island's eternal optimist. But the man behind the skipper was far more complex than the jolly figure America came to love. Alan Hale, Jr. was the son of a Hollywood legend, Alan Hale, Sr., a famed character actor who had worked alongside Errol Flynn. Growing up in his father's shadow, Alan Jr. inherited both the charisma and the burden of legacy. Hollywood doors opened easily, but expectations loomed even larger. Despite working in over 200 film and television roles before Gilligan's Island, Hale would never again escape the identity of the skipper. The role that made him a household name also became his lifelong cage. Casting directors couldn't see past the uniform, and Hale, with his round face and hearty laugh, was locked in place, typecast forever. He once joked, "It's not a bad thing to be remembered for making people smile, but privately, it weighed on him." While he loved his fans and embraced the show with loyalty, his career trajectory flattened after the series ended. Major film roles dried up. He was often reduced to making appearances at county fairs, car dealerships, and even Gilligan's Island-themed seafood restaurants where he would wear his skipper hat just to keep the lights on. Off-screen, Hale was known for his warmth and generosity. He was a devoted family man who married twice and had 4 children. But behind the big-hearted exterior was a man quietly carrying disappointment, not bitter, but wistful. His second wife, Naomi Grace Ingram, stood by him through the lean years. He cherished his children, though he admitted once that they rarely saw the real man, only the character the world demanded him to be. Later in life, Alan was diagnosed with thymus cancer, a rare and aggressive disease. Even as the illness ravaged his body, he continued to make public appearances, signing autographs and shaking hands, still wearing the skipper hat, still smiling for cameras. He refused to let fans see the pain. On January 2, 1990, Alan Hale Jr. died at the age of 68 in Los Angeles. He was cremated, and his ashes scattered into the Pacific Ocean, a poetic return for a man whose most famous role was forever tied to the sea. Jim Bakus as Thirsten Howell III. Jim Bakus, born February 25, 1913, took on the role of the eccentric millionaire Thirsten Howell III when Gilligan's Island premiered in 1964. He was 51 years old at the time. With his haughty voice, silk handkerchiefs, and absurd devotion to wealth, even while stranded, Bakus created a character that was both a biting satire of the upper class and an oddly lovable castaway. But Jim Bakus was far more than just the millionaire. He was one of the most versatile entertainers of his era, a radio veteran, comedic actor, and voice behind Mr. Magoo, the famously nearsighted cartoon gentleman. On screen, he was all laughter and control. Off-screen, his life was a slow unraveling marked by hidden addiction, failing health, and a deep yearning to stay relevant in an industry that kept moving without him. Born into a wealthy Cleveland family, Bakus knew the world of high society firsthand, which made his portrayal of Thirsten Howell III all the more authentic. But unlike his character, Bakus never leaned on luxury. He fought for every role. Before Gilligan's Island, he had already built a career through hard work, dozens of radio comedies, voice acting gigs, and a memorable role as James Dean's father in Rebel Without a Cause. Yet for all his success, Bakus harbored a lifelong struggle with alcoholism. While he often joked about it in public, his drinking strained friendships, torpedoed opportunities, and haunted his marriage. His wife, actress, and author Henny Bakus stood by him through it all, even as his addiction became harder to hide. The laughter began to fade in the late 1970s. Bakus was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, and the tremors robbed him of his signature comic timing and booming voice. As the disease progressed, he became more reclusive, slowly withdrawing from public life. But he remained brave. In 1984, he and Henny co-wrote Forgive Us Our Digressions, a memoir that pulled back the curtain on their marriage struggles and pain. It was an act of naked honesty in a business built on illusion. In one of his last on-screen appearances, he briefly reprised his role as Thirsten Howell III in the Harlem Globetrotters on Gilligan's Island, 1981. But even then, his frailty was clear, a once commanding voice reduced to whispers, a once sharp wit dulled by disease. On July 3, 1989, Jim Bakus died at the age of 76, succumbing to complications from Parkinson's. He passed away in Los Angeles, surrounded by few but loved by millions. He was cremated, and his ashes were scattered at sea, a fitting end for a man who made an island his eternal stage. Natalie Schaefer as Lovey Howell. Natalie Schaefer, born on November 5, 1900, took on the role of the elegant and pampered Eunice Lovey Howell when Gilligan's Island began airing in 1964. She was 63 years old, but she never told a soul. In fact, Natalie had spent most of her career shaving years off her age, so much so that even her closest friends were stunned when her real birth year surfaced after her death. On screen, Lovey was the picture of old-money sophistication, pearls gloves, and an unwavering loyalty to her eccentric millionaire husband. But behind the diamonds and designer gowns was a woman shaped by painful secrets, profound losses, and a fiercely guarded heart. Natalie was born into a well-off German-Jewish family in Red Bank, New Jersey. She studied ballet and began her career in Broadway theater, gracing the stage in the 1920s and 30s. Though she later moved into film and television, her true love remained the stage, a world she never quite left behind, even when Hollywood called. Despite playing a happily married socialite, Natalie Schaefer never had children and never remarried after her divorce from actor Louis Calhern in the early 1940s. Their marriage was brief and troubled. Calhern's infidelity and alcoholism pushed Schaefer to walk away. She never spoke publicly about the emotional cost, but friends said she carried the pain of that failed love quietly for the rest of her life. She kept her personal life tightly sealed. No one really knew the details of her relationships or whether she ever found love again. Rumors swirled about affairs, but Schaefer never confirmed or denied them. Instead, she leaned into solitude, keeping close only a handful of friends and her beloved dog. Her portrayal of Lovey Howell earned her widespread fame in her 60s, but it also came with a cost. She, like many of the Gilligan's Island cast, became typecast. Offers for serious roles disappeared, and Schaefer found herself doing guest spots and cameos, always in variations of the wealthy matron she had perfected. It was both a gift and a curse. Still, she embraced the fans and kept working until her health failed. What few people knew was that Schaefer had quietly become a millionaire through savvy real estate investments in Beverly Hills. She lived simply despite her wealth in a modest Spanish-style home tucked away from the spotlight. In her final years, Schaefer was diagnosed with liver cancer, a condition she kept private until the end. She refused treatment, choosing instead to spend her last months quietly at home. Even in sickness, she maintained the same elegance and wit that defined her career. On April 10, 1991, Natalie Schaefer passed away at the age of 90. She left no public will, no family to speak of, but what she did leave was a surprise. A significant portion of her estate, including a 7-figure donation, was left to the Motion Picture and Television Hospital, specifically to support the care of aging actors. It was a final, silent gesture of grace to the community she never fully trusted but never abandoned either. Russell Johnson as the Professor. Russell David Johnson, born November 10, 1924, took on the role of Professor Roy Hinckley in Gilligan's Island when the show began in 1964. He was 39 years old, poised, handsome, and intelligent, portraying the brainy castaway whose encyclopedic knowledge could build a coconut radio, but somehow never fix the boat. The role made him a pop culture icon forever known simply as the Professor. But the real Russell Johnson was no sitcom cliché. Behind the chalkboard wit and calm demeanor was a man who had seen death, endured war, and buried his own child. Before Hollywood, Russell was a genuine war hero. At just 18, he enlisted in the United States Army Air Forces during World War II and became a decorated bombardier. In 1945, his B-24 was shot down over the Philippines. He was badly wounded, suffering multiple fractures. He watched fellow crewmates die in the crash and was honorably discharged with a Purple Heart. The trauma haunted him silently for the rest of his life. When he transitioned to acting in the 1950s, he brought a quiet intensity to his roles, often playing sheriffs, scientists, or villains in westerns and science fiction. But Gilligan's Island would define him whether he wanted it to or not. Russell resisted the fame at first. He found it frustrating that his decades of dramatic work were erased by a single comedic role. He once joked bitterly, "People think I can explain black holes because I fixed a battery with bamboo." Still, over time, he came to embrace the Professor, attending fan conventions, speaking at universities, and using the platform to inspire science education. Yet Johnson's personal life was marked by profound heartbreak. He married twice and had 3 children. His oldest son, David, was diagnosed with AIDS in the early 1980s, a time when stigma and fear isolated entire families. Russell and his second wife, Constance, defied that fear. They became outspoken AIDS activists, caring for David until his death in 1994. The loss of his son broke him. Friends said he was never quite the same afterward. He rarely smiled in photos, and he stopped taking acting roles for nearly a decade. Instead, he focused on volunteering for AIDS foundations, appearing at benefits, and quietly supporting families going through the same pain he knew all too well. In later years, Johnston returned to the screen briefly and even made peace with his Gilligan legacy. He appeared in tribute specials and reunited with surviving cast members, though he often noted how many had already passed on. He spent his final years in Washington state in a modest home overlooking the water. Fittingly, he could often be found sitting quietly near the shore, the same kind of place his character had once been stranded. Only now it was by choice, not fate. On January 16, 2014, Russell Johnson died at age 89 from kidney failure. He was the second to last surviving main cast member of Gilligan's Island, his passing marking the end of an era for millions of fans. He was cremated, his ashes reportedly scattered near his home, returned to the peaceful stillness he had earned. Dawn Wells, as Maryanne Summers. Dawn Alberta Wells, born October 18, 1938, brought to life the sweet, grounded, and endlessly optimistic Maryanne Summers on Gilligan's Island in 1964 when she was just 26 years old. The girl next door from Kansas with pigtails, gingham dresses, and an open heart became one of the most beloved characters in television history. But while the world fell in love with Maryanne, the woman who played her lived a very different reality full of loneliness, personal sacrifice, and quiet sorrow. Dawn Wells grew up in Reno, Nevada, raised by a single mother who instilled in her a sense of independence, grace, and discipline. A former Miss Nevada and a classically trained actress, Wells never dreamed of comedy. She envisioned a career on the Shakespearean stage. But destiny and a perfectly timed audition put her aboard the SS Minnow and into the hearts of generations. On set, she was the youngest cast member and the emotional glue of the ensemble. While Tina Louise Ginger often clashed with the rest of the cast, Dawn kept the peace, bringing joy cookies and warmth to every corner of the soundstage. Her kindness was legendary, but so was the typecasting that followed her for life. After Gilligan's Island ended in 1967, Wells found it nearly impossible to land serious roles. She was too wholesome, too cute, too Maryanne. Directors only wanted her in remakes or novelty cameos. Though she worked in regional theater and made appearances in game shows, Dawn never again found the fame or financial security she had during her island years. Her personal life was filled with silence. She married once briefly to talent agent Larry Rosen in 1962, but the marriage ended in divorce 5 years later around the time the show was wrapping. She never remarried, never had children, and rarely spoke about romantic partners in later years. Behind her bright smile was a woman who had chosen solitude, but not always by choice. In interviews, Wells confessed that she often felt forgotten by Hollywood. And in her later years, that emotional invisibility turned into financial desperation. In 2018, it was revealed she was deeply in debt, struggling to pay medical bills after a life-threatening fall. A GoFundMe campaign set up by a friend raised over $200,000 from devoted fans, a bittersweet reminder of the love she had earned, but the industry that had abandoned her. Yet even in hardship, Dawn Wells never stopped giving. She toured the country speaking about acting kindness and resilience. She worked with people with disabilities, mentored young actors, and authored a book titled What Would Maryanne Do?, which blended her character's wholesome philosophy with personal reflections. She insisted that Maryanne wasn't just a role, she was a moral compass, a voice of hope. In 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic would claim her life. Dawn Wells died on December 30th, 2020 at the age of 82 from complications related to the virus. She passed away in Los Angeles alone in the hospital in a year filled with isolation for so many. Her death stunned fans and castmates alike. She had been to them the symbol of enduring sweetness, someone who never changed even as the world did. Veto Scotty, as Dr. Boris Balinkoff. Veto Justo Scotty, born January 26, 1918 in San Francisco, California, was already a seasoned veteran of stage and screen when he appeared in Gilligan's Island between 1964 and 1967. He was 46 years old when he first joined the show, not as a series regular, but as an unforgettable revolving door of oddball guest characters, from a Japanese sailor who doesn't know the war is over, to a deranged doctor, to a mad dictator lost at sea. Scotty didn't need a recurring role to leave an impression. His wild eyes, rubbery face, and boundless energy stole every scene he was in. But behind that manic brilliance was a man who spent a lifetime hiding his real self behind masks and slowly eroding from the loneliness that comes with never quite belonging. Veto was the son of Italian immigrants growing up in Los Angeles during the Great Depression. He spoke fluent Italian and Spanish, and later in life he'd master accents so convincingly that he was cast as virtually every ethnicity imaginable: Japanese, Mexican, Indian, Arab, Russian, even Polynesian. In today's world, it might be controversial, but in his time, he was the go-to ethnic everyman of mid-century television. Scotty was typecast endlessly, almost never given serious or leading roles, despite being a classically trained stage actor. His immense range was reduced to caricature: the excitable foreigner, the sneaky waiter, the confused visitor. He privately resented being boxed in, and in later interviews, he admitted that it made him feel invisible, like a tool rather than an artist. He was a deeply private man, rarely seen at Hollywood parties or red carpet events. Colleagues said he would vanish the moment filming wrapped, not for scandal, but because he struggled with crippling anxiety and self-doubt. His first marriage ended quietly and painfully, and though he later remarried and had children, he carried the scars of abandonment and failure deep into his later years. Despite appearing in over 200 films and television episodes, Veto Scotty never achieved mainstream fame. But his work ethic was legendary. He was never late, never missed a line, and always brought more than the script asked for. From The Godfather, where he played the nervous undertaker, to Columbo and The Flying Nun, he was the man everyone recognized, but no one could name. He kept acting into his 70s, but his health began to decline in the early 1990s. He was diagnosed with lung cancer, the result of decades of smoking, a habit he picked up during stage work in the 1940s to calm his nerves before curtain calls. The cancer spread quickly, and he refused aggressive treatment, saying simply, "I've had a good run. Better than most." On June 5, 1996, Veto Scotty passed away in Los Angeles at the age of 78. His death barely made headlines, a brief mention in trade publications, a small obituary in the Los Angeles Times. But those who worked with him remembered him as one of the last great character men, a shapeshifter, a workhorse, a ghost who moved through television history without ever fully being seen. Eddie Little Sky is native. Eddie Little Sky, born August 15, 1926. On the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation in South Dakota, made a brief yet powerful appearance on Gilligan's Island in 1966, portraying a native warrior in a comedic episode. He was 40 years old at the time. Though the role was small and, like many native characters of that era, steeped in stereotypes, Eddie's real-life story was anything but small. He was one of the very first indigenous actors to break into Hollywood with his own name, identity, and quiet strength intact. Born into the Oglala Lakota Sioux Nation, Eddie grew up in poverty on land scarred by broken promises and generational loss. English wasn't his first language. Like many native children of his time, he was sent to a government-run boarding school where his culture, language, and traditions were suppressed. That loss left wounds he carried forever, wounds that would later shape the roles he accepted and those he refused. During World War II, Eddie served honorably in the U.S. Navy, working as a gunner aboard ships in the Pacific. After the war, he returned home with hope and trauma alike, unsure where a Lakota warrior fit in a white man's world. Fate intervened when he was hired as a technical advisor for Hollywood westerns, helping directors accurately portray native culture. But it didn't take long for someone to notice his commanding presence in front of the camera. He began acting in the 1950s and 60s, appearing in more than 60 films and TV series, including Gunsmoke Bonanza Walker, Texas Ranger, and, of course, Gilligan's Island. Yet nearly every role asked him to portray the same thing: the stoic, silent, sometimes savage Indian. And though Eddie did what he could to bring dignity to those roles, he longed for more, for depth, for truth, for visibility. He never had a leading role. He never played a romantic hero, but he became a symbol within the Native community, a man who never sold out his name or heritage, who showed young Native actors that it was possible to walk into Hollywood without taking off your moccasins at the door. Off-screen, Eddie was a family man married to actress Dawn Gates, with whom he had children. Their home was a haven of Lakota culture stories and quiet resistance. He often spoke at reservation schools and Native events, encouraging the next generation to reclaim their narratives and fight for roles that reflected their real lives. But despite his quiet victories, his later years were filled with health challenges. He suffered from diabetes and complications related to heart disease illnesses that were rampant across Native populations due to years of systemic neglect and poverty. He gradually withdrew from acting in the 1980s, tired of the same offers, tired of Hollywood's refusal to evolve. Eddie never amassed wealth or fame. He lived modestly, relying on residual checks and tribal pensions, but he remained proud. He once said, "If they remember me as a Lakota who stood with honor, I've done enough." On September 5, 1997, Eddie Little Sky passed away at the age of 71 in Pennington County, South Dakota. His funeral was held in Lakota tradition, surrounded by family drumming and prayer, not cameras or red carpets. He was laid to rest near the land where he was born. Denny Miller as Duke Williams. Denny Scott Miller, born April 25, 1934 in Bloomington, Indiana, made a memorable guest appearance on Gilligan's Island in the mid-1960s, playing the role of Tongo the Ape Man, a comic riff on Tarzan. He was around 30 years old, shirtless, muscular, and swinging from vines, the picture of a perfect specimen in a show built on fantasy. In 1959, at just 25, Denny Miller became the first blonde Tarzan in Hollywood history, starring in Tarzan the Ape Man. He was discovered while working as a basketball player at UCLA, where he had earned a degree in physical education. A producer spotted his 6'4" frame and chiseled good looks and handed him a contract before he had ever taken an acting class. He was thrown into the jungle quite literally and never given a map to find his way back. Miller spent the next few decades trapped in a body he never fully identified with. Though strong and athletic, Denny was an introspective, thoughtful man who loved writing, painting, and philosophy. But Hollywood only saw the surface. He played cowboys, warriors, and he-men in shows like Wagon Train the Rifleman and Gunsmoke, while deeper roles always slipped out of reach. Despite appearances, Denny's personal life was often fragile. His first marriage ended in heartbreak, and for many years he described himself as emotionally rootless, going from gig to gig, relationship to relationship, unsure of what he really wanted or who he really was. In interviews, he admitted to struggling with depression and disillusionment, especially in the 1970s, when offers dried up and he was forced to take roles in beer commercials and second-tier guest spots just to pay the bills. At one point, he seriously considered quitting acting altogether and becoming a teacher, something he said would have given his life actual purpose. But Miller pushed on, fueled not by fame, but by the hope that someone might see more in him than a physique. In 2004, he published a memoir titled, "Didn't You Used to Be? What's His Name?" A painfully honest account of what it meant to be almost famous, to be remembered for something you barely controlled, and to be forgotten by the time you turned around. Later in life, he found love again with his second wife, Nancy, who brought peace and companionship after decades of inner chaos. They toured the country in an RV, giving motivational speeches to retirees and young actors, talking candidly about self-worth, impermanence, and the trap of chasing image over identity. But fate had one more test. In 2014, Denny Miller was diagnosed with amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, ALS, a degenerative neurological disease that slowly robs the body of movement and life. For a man known for his towering strength and athletic grace, it was a cruel, ironic twist. His body failed him, but his voice did not. He continued writing and sharing messages of hope even as the illness progressed. On September 9, 2014, Denny Miller passed away at the age of 80 in Las Vegas. He died surrounded by love, not applause, and in many ways that was how he had always wanted to go. Zaha Gabbor as Erica Tiffany Smith. Zaha Gabbor, born February 6, 1917, in Budapest, Hungary, appeared on Gilligan's Island in 1965 at the age of 48, playing the role of Erica Tiffany Smith, a glamorous socialite who tries to buy the island from the castaways. It was a tongue-in-cheek cameo, but it captured everything the world thought they knew about her beauty charm and outrageous wealth. But the real woman behind the diamonds was far more complicated, a survivor of war, a prisoner of fame, and a heartbroken soul who spent her life surrounded by cameras but rarely felt seen. Born Sari Gabbor, she was the middle child of three famous sisters, Eva and Magda, being the others in a wealthy Jewish family in pre-war Hungary. She was crowned Miss Hungary in 1936, though the title was later contested. In 1941, she escaped war-torn Europe and moved to America, where her accent, exotic beauty, and sharp wit quickly made her a socialite sensation. Zaha didn't just play the Hollywood game, she became the game. She acted in over 70 films and TV shows, though she was rarely praised for her performances. She was famous for being famous, often saying, "I am a marvelous housekeeper. Every time I leave a man, I keep his house." But behind those quotes and pearls was a woman scarred by rejection, betrayal, and loss. She married 9 times, most famously to hotel magnate Conrad Hilton, with whom she had her only child, Francesca Hilton. That relationship was fraught with emotional neglect. Zaha later claimed she was raped by Conrad during their marriage, a statement that shocked many, but was quietly buried under the weight of her public image. Her daughter Francesca, meanwhile, grew up largely estranged. Zaha was never seen as a nurturing mother, and their relationship became strained, bitter, and full of lawsuits. In a cruel twist of fate, Francesca died in poverty in 2015, just 1 year before her mother having been cut off from Zaha's estate. Despite her jet-set lifestyle, Zaha battled deep insecurity. She underwent numerous plastic surgeries, constantly chasing youth, terrified of aging in an industry that worshipped the young. She filed lawsuits, was sued herself, and in 1989 slapped a Beverly Hills police officer, an incident that made headlines around the world and led to a short jail sentence. It was the perfect storm of her persona, defiant, flamboyant, and tragic. In her final decade, tragedy mounted. In 2002, she was involved in a car accident that left her partially paralyzed. A stroke followed in 2005. In 2010, her right leg was amputated due to a severe infection. She spent her final years bedridden, silenced, and mostly out of the public eye, her body failing while her legend lingered. Her 9th husband, Frederick Prince von Anhalt, 26 years her junior, became her caretaker and public spokesperson. Some questioned his motives. Others believed he truly gave her the companionship she had long been denied. The tabloids never stopped speculating. Zaha, once the center of every room, could no longer speak for herself. On December 18, 2016, Zaha Gabbor died at the age of 99 from heart failure, just 2 months shy of her 100th birthday. Per her wishes, she was cremated and interred in Budapest, returning at last to the country that gave her to the world. They may have been stranded on a fictional island, but the cast of Gilligan's Island left behind a very real legacy of laughter, heartbreak, and unforgettable humanity. Behind the palm trees and punchlines were lives touched by triumph and tragedy, each castaway carrying their own burden. And though the credits have long since rolled, their stories still echo like waves on the shore of our memories.